Hi. Okay, so it's working. Hello, guys. Good night. So first of all, welcome all to Nubank. We're very happy to have you here. We're very happy with the success of this event. We have many people. We're almost at full capacity. So thank you very much for being here. My name is Cami. I'm a product manager here at Nubank. I will just give some general announcements so you guys are not lost in the building. So first things, we have food and beer and water in the back. And to my left, there's a bathroom if you guys need to use it. Um, we also have a parking lot. I think some of you may have parked there. So one quick announcement is that the parking lot closes at 10. So we might go a little bit further than that, but you have to remove your car before that. And I think that's it. So I'll briefly pass the agenda. As you may have noticed, we are hiring. So if you're interested or have someone you want to refer, please reach out for us. So quick agenda. So we'll have a meetup with Hugh and John here. So they will be introducing themselves. We will have a quick talk where they will interview each other and talk for about 40 minutes or something. Then we'll have a Q&A open. So we'll have an app where you can send your questions and we'll be able to answer them. And then we'll have a happy hour and a get-together time so we can get to know each other and you can get to know us better. If you need anything, reach out to people with the badges and the black shirts that are from Nubank, and they should help you with whatever you need. So thank you very much, and I'll give it up to them.
Hi. Hello, hello, hello. Can everybody at the back hear me okay? Cool. Can you guys see John? I know he's a little to the left here. Cool. Well, look, thank you everybody for coming. I was kidding around with John. It's actually an event in Brazil that seems to be almost running on time, which is great. I'm our VP of product here at Nubank. I've been with the company since 2014. So when we talked about lessons learned from 101 product teams, I'm contributing one product team, which is the Nubank one. John's going to talk about his experience with a lot of other product teams around the world. Just before we get started, who in the audience is a product manager or a product owner? Wow, okay. Who's an engineer? I saw Lucas somewhere earlier. Yeah. Designers? Business people? Just
the
kidding.
business.
We're all business
The
people,
business.
guys. Cool. Marketing? Product marketing managers? Cool. Awesome. Well, look, thank you everybody for joining us. This is something we've been looking forward to doing for a while. We're really happy to have John here. Quick intro on John. He's been working with us for a while. He's a product evangelist with Amplitude. But prior to that, and I'm going to refer to my notes a little bit here. He has worked at Zendesk, Pendo, AppFolio as a product manager and UX researcher. Some of you guys who read blogs about products, maybe on Medium or Hacker Noon, John blogs a lot, and we like reading his blog posts. And actually, a lot of the stuff that we've played around with at Nubank, sometimes it's unclear whether sort of he's inspired us or if he's written a blog post about having worked with us. But I think he's clearly someone who thinks a lot about product management and product issues, and so we're really glad to have him here.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to start with some general questions, and then we're probably going to run this little bit for maybe about 45 minutes or 50 minutes. Then we're going to open it up to questions from you guys, and so we'll kind of pick a few that are coming from you and ask those to John. I'll try to focus it mostly on him, but I'll share a little bit about Nubank and our story as well along the way. So, question number one. So you've worked with over 100 product teams. What are the 3 most common mistakes that you see over and over again? And what are some of the traps?
Hello, everyone. Well, first, this is amazing that everyone's here. It's incredible. I've seen a lot of mistakes. I do these coaching calls as a part of working at Amplitude. And so we set them up, and we set them up with customers and prospects, and then just the general product public. Can you guys hear me all right? Cool. And, I'd say that the first thing is that there's a muscle involved with getting better as a team. So anyone who works on a particular team with, 3, 4, 5, 6 people or 7 people or a small team, you can imagine how hard that is, right? You're supposed to do maybe a retrospective, and you're supposed to prioritize some things, and no one gets to it, and every week you talk about the same crap over and over and over again. And that's hard, even working on a small team like that. But I would say that most of the product teams that I talk to haven't really even spoken about their own muscle for continuous improvement. So they'll have status checks every quarter. They'll make everyone get their roadmap together. They'll talk about all their work. But when it comes to the teams actually thinking about what's working and not working as a product team, let's say you have 20 product managers or 30 product managers or 15 product managers, that doesn't happen. And so I think that's the first thing is, the suggestion there is talk with your team about how you want to approach getting better as a team. What's painful for you as a team and other things. Because unless you do that, all this other stuff, a lot of these calls, someone will say, well, how should we do OKRs? Or how should we do this? Or we've read about outcomes over outputs. Or we've read any number of things. And honestly, I very rarely have that many new ideas about what, I know what kind of works and doesn't work, and I'll say tweak this or tweak that. But I'll check back with them in a month, and I'll say, well, how did it go? Did it work? And he said, well, no, we haven't been able to try it yet because, well, we haven't tried it yet, or we tried it for 1 week and it didn't work, and so now we've stopped doing it. So I'd say number one is figure out how to build your muscle for continuous improvement as a product team is the number one mistake, and then the number one solution is to start that cycle. What's one thing that you can do in the next month to improve? Hold yourself accountable to it, run some experiments to see how you can improve, and then reflect back on that in 1 month. Did it work? Great, turn up the volume. Didn't work, turn down the volume and see. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I see is just not a lot of attention to bringing junior product managers into the fold and helping them get better. And it's kind of a sad story. I remember working with a more junior product manager, and she said, she would cry at work and say that this is impossibly hard. The engineers are so hard on me. Design is a better product manager than I am. I'd argue that's true a lot of times. But, I asked, well, what's the mentorship like? Well, my director meets with me. We have a one-to-one every 2 weeks or something, gives me some suggestions. What does your director do all the time? Well, she or he's managing up half the time. Like, they are going to these meetings or doing that. And so I'd say that, no one becomes good at this without practice and without mentorship and other things. And it's so easy, especially even in a high-performing team, to just completely overwhelm the junior product manager about what they should do. So often when I hear about this, I hear a VP will say to me something like, I don't know what to do. I need to hire more experienced PMs, and I'll say, well, what's your learning path like? Can you bring someone in and, pair with them for 2 months? Oh, no, we assign them to a team, and then there's a scrum master, and there's another person, and we just generally watch over them. So I'm like, well, your problem is not that you can't find experienced product managers. The problem is that you can't bring someone junior into your organization and improve their skills and do that. So I would say that's the second thing. It's a very harsh reality about where we're working and the environment we're working in. But the bright side story, I remember most people I know, PMs who've gotten kind of direct coaching or have had someone like an agile coach or someone like that work with them more closely, is generally able to improve their skills, and generally able to get better. So I'd say that's the second thing. And the third thing is just not, I know it's cliche, is just not learning how to say no in these environments. I think that if you don't have a product strategy, if you can't have a persuasive story that doesn't sound like bullshit to the rest of your company will invent a product strategy. Marketing will invent a product strategy because they'll need to. And so I remember dealing, I had a salesperson friend. We actually have a salesperson from our company, so I'm not going to say anything about it. Oh, Jason is here somewhere. And he said, well, dude, I just got to sell the roadmap. I just got to keep selling the roadmap. I got what's on the roadmap? I'm just going to keep selling those things. And it was only when we really, really clarified the strategy that they said, you know, I get it. I get that I don't need to sell the roadmap. Like, I get that I can really understand. You've given me these personas. These are incredibly valuable to sell. You've explained the needs that the product tries to meet. That helps me sell really, really well. I went from having to try to keep selling what we're doing next to selling what we have right now very, very effectively. And so that was only when we really communicated the strategy in a way that sounded reasonable to them and sounded like something that they could relate to. And so I'd say that's kind of the third thing is especially in this it's highly iterative world, and people think, well, why are we planning so far ahead and doing those things? I think there's a mistake that you need to plan very specifically far ahead versus just being able to tell a coherent story about where you're going. Has anyone read the book Sapiens? So in Sapiens, Yuval Harari says that most institutions that humans have are stories, just extremely persuasive stories. Like money is a story. How we interact maybe with our governments are a story, kind of a bad story, at least in the United States at the moment. But there are these very coherent stories. And so what I say about the strategy side is it's not about manufacturing certainty. Because every engineer on your team, every designer will look at you in the eye and say, that's bullshit. It's about being able to explain a story with all the warts and messiness and things, but still in a powerful way that engages people to come into your product. And I think a lot with these very short-term, iterative things, product is kind of in some ways lost in these environments, like the art of strategy and the art of communicating about strategy. And so even though I'm very much into doing what you need to do right now to learn, being able to frame a persuasive story is powerful. So those three things: getting better, bringing junior PMs in, and then thinking about strategy as a communication tool. Does that make sense?
Great. Let's take each one of those and maybe dive in a little bit. So on continuous improvement, can you think of like a real kind of world-class product team that you've seen besides Nubank?
Nubank.
And what are some what are specific things that you see? Like you basically go into that team and you're like, wow, like these guys are learning and they know they are, and they're just getting better and better and better.
I'm going to describe it as a feeling, and I think anyone who's been working in an effective and healthy environment knows this feeling. The problems never go away. Never, ever, ever go away. So if you imagine that somehow just suddenly the problems just go away, actually the better you get, the more problems you have, the more challenging the problems you have. And even in the last couple months, I've spoken to teams, Amazon and Microsoft and Intercom. I've just been so lucky. This is like a dream come true, this job, because I get to talk to these teams. But it's not like the problems go away. What you actually observe from the outside is things generally work themselves out. It's the difference, I'd say it's the difference between having a chronic injury and an acute injury. If you're playing sports and you have an acute injury, you can hurt yourself. And then your body heals and it comes back stronger and it does those things. But when you have an chronic injury, these problems linger for a period of time. So this is going to sound kind of weird, but when you ask those leaders, how long has the most toxic person stayed in your environment? 3 months, 6 months, 7 months. When you talk to a company that has a lot of chronic issues, how long has the most toxic person stayed in your environment? 12 months, 18 months, 3 years. They're still here. So back to this whole thing about the problems never go away. What you observe is that there's always some present problems, but they're just working their way through them. There's generally a sense that things are getting better, but still staying challenging for the team. So it's kind of more of a sense, it's more something you observe, it's more like a feeling than a very, very specific thing.
Sure, but do you find, do these teams, do they do a really good job of measuring those things? I mean, will they actually have like a top 10 toxic people list, like things like this where they're really, I'm kidding about that, but are there better metrics around these things? Is it more than just a sense, or is that kind of missing the point?
Well, I actually think, there's a great book called How to Measure Anything by Hubbard. And I really, really, really like that book because measurement's very much related to obviously what, what you're trying to measure. So maybe as it relates to the product and it relates to drag in your development process or it relates to the success of the features, there's certainly measurement involved in those particular things. You start to see things like health checks for the teams. The question is, are you doing the minimal amount of measurement to be able to guide decisions? So for example, I worked with a team once and our main measurement was, what is the probability that we're going to have a P1 issue this week in your heart of hearts on a Monday morning? And it started out at like 100% chance we will have a P1 issue this week, and we would have a P1 issue this week. And then it was starting to like, then 1 week would go by where there wasn't one. And we'd be like, well, if we kind of look at historical data here, in the last 20 weeks, we've now had 1 week. Well, okay, you started to do the math and do these things. So in terms of measurement, a lot of times you see like just qualitative measurement too, and I think that you can't discount the qualitative measurement. But I'd say that's kind of a very deep question about measurement. But I'd say it's using the right approaches to measurement for the right problems that you see that. But one thing you definitely see is this cycle of retrospection, inspection, and then the trust, the psychological safety to talk about what's not working, and then the ability to just pick out 1 or 2 or 3 things. Another thing and this is kind of a measurement thing, they don't try to solve all the problems at once, right? There's usually 1, 2, or 3 things that are like severely hampering your product team, and the question is to address those first. So that's another thing that you see.
What about career development? So you mentioned, and this one resonates, I bet, with some of our team. Putting young PMs into squads all by themselves, not supporting them a lot. I know we've done that a few times. How do you
It's
see?
okay, Hugh.
What's that?
So it's okay.
Okay. How do you see really high performing teams dealing with that? I mean, do they have much stronger mentorship programs? How do they create that path effectively?
One thing is that in general, those high-performing, maybe like better fit teams or strong teams, first of all, there's just people are a little calmer, right? So the first thing that you see is like they have time to pair with people. They have time to do like an extended onboarding. An example might be something like, wow, our junior PMs, we put them through a 2-month onboarding where they go and they sit on the support desk. They go and they do two weeks of customer visits with a user research person. So what you generally see on those teams is just, if it's important, they spend time and energy on it. So for lack of a better word, they put their money where their mouth is in terms of like bringing these people onto these things. Another thing that I've started to see a lot more recently is, especially when teams have really started to gel and UX is there embedded on the team and you've got like a really good flow with the teams, is they're not so worried about having every team have a product manager. You're more likely to see like a product manager with an assistant or an apprentice who's a more junior person learning the trade week in, week out, like learning how to do the things. And so when you ask these teams, who's your PM, they say that one PM. They don't say the apprentice. But that's another great model that I've observed in a couple settings. So I'd say it's a combination of just taking the time to onboard that person, that level. If you are a director level person and you're spending 70% of your time managing up and to the side, and 30% of your time getting ready for other meetings, you're not going to spend the time to onboard and to create that connection with someone. Another environment you start to see more. A lot of agile coaches I know are actually pretty decent PMs, or like they kind of generally understand it. So in one organization that I was familiar with, strong UX, strong agile coaching, and really evolved engineers actually helped bring up the PMs in that. So I think it's put your money where your mouth is if it's important.
Great. I'm going to skip stories and come back to that a little bit later. I want to start talking a bit about some of your blog posts and sort of general knowledge. So you've talked a bunch about how, or have summarized product management as kind of decision velocity times decision quality equals impact.
Yeah.
And you've used that framing with us. You've written about it a bunch. Can you just talk about a little bit more about why you think that kind of sums up the field to some extent, and why kind of those are the two main levers, and why that's kind of a useful framing mechanism for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm exploring just like everyone, and so I kind of got more into this, and probably in a year I'll onto something else. But for the last year, I've been really into this idea that a product manager's job is to foster an environment where the best decisions can happen reasonably quickly. And so the reason why I like that framing, actually, is it's not about your ideas. There's many cases where the PM's ideas are not the best ideas. And once you start to take that particular frame, you start to understand that if you can keep that flow of reasonably good decisions happening reasonably quickly, it says a lot about the particular team. It says a lot about your mission and a lot about what you're doing. I don't think for sure it's the one thing. I think that there's definitely an art to it, and I do think it's very important for teams to feel the impact of their work and things. But I really like decision quality and decision velocity as kind of a North Star, because a great example is you're a product manager, you've spent the whole week. I say to the PM, like, what did you do this week? They open up Google Calendar, and they're like, this. What's this? I've been in meetings. How'd they go? I don't remember one. Did you go to the...
Is this familiar to people in the room? Yes? Okay.
Did you go to the dentist? Because there's dentist appointment. No, I missed the appointment, so I have to go next week. Great. Like, how did you help a better decision happen this week? Well, I think my team was pinging me on Slack that one day, and then I promised to get back to them onto this other thing. You can just tell. You can tell that they're not really helping in that particular thing. And I think that it's safe. I'm going to be honest to the PMs because I talk to a lot of engineers. A lot of engineers are kind of on the fence about what value you're adding. in the sense that they're making these cost-benefit decisions every 15 minutes. They're judged by every line of code that they write. It works or it doesn't work. It passes or it doesn't. It fails in production or it doesn't. They get yelled at because they're stepping on UX's toes. UX yells at them to be able to do these particular things. They're highly scrutinized every second. And so when they think of the PM, they're like, I think that my PM just fills up their calendar and then just goes and doesn't even know what they did all week and can't remember any of the meetings they had. What was the value add? Would I hire this product manager if I controlled the budget? And there's a lot of simplification with that and a lot of misunderstanding with it, but I think that this is going to sound funny. There's a lot of this stuff about servant leadership and being a mini CEO and trying to do all these like voodoo arts of persuasion on your team and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think they look to you as like, are they doing the work? Are they helping us with context? Are they helping us make better decisions day in, day out? And I would say that the best PMs that I've met in my career, if you go to their team at the end of the week and you say, how are things going out? They're like, it was awesome. I really needed that analysis done, and they came back with that analysis. And we were having trouble getting on the phone with that customer. They really brought that in. Or they modeled the business in a really unique and interesting way that now, as an engineer, I'm able to fully understand the strategy. This is really, really helpful. So that's a lot of... I even forget the question, but I'm pretty tired. I got this like small baby. And Hugh and I were on the same red-eye flight this morning from Dallas, so...
No. So we were talking about decision quality.
Yeah.
Decision
I made the decision to take the red eye. Right.
It was a quality decision to be here.
But it was a reasonably fast decision.
So what about some of the things that go wrong on the velocity side and the quality side? And do you see teams, for example, more junior teams have more problems with velocity because maybe they're they're not very good at dealing with uncertainty. Bigger teams may have problems with quality. Can you walk us through like some of the ways that it breaks down or it goes wrong?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a couple. I wish I had something to explain it, but there's a couple factors that lead to decision quality and decision velocity. You need information. It can be qualitative data, be quantitative data. You need to be sensing something. Two, you need to be able to you create mental models for what you're sensing. So you're modeling. You've created a shared mental model, shared understanding of things. So you get information. You're making sense of it, and then you start to transition to things like. You need to create alignment. You know, just because you're sensing everything and creating mental models, if you try to do everything, you're not going to get anything done. So you need to be able to cut out information and start focusing. Then you need flow. You need to create conditions where your team can actually, you know, test things, get things into production, get information to do those things. And then I would say you need a supportive environment. You need psychological safety. You need trust. You need to use the appropriate methods at the appropriate time. You need to create. So if you think about decision, and I've done this exercise with your team. Like we did an exercise with Nubank and said, what adds to decision quality and decision velocity? And generally the exact same categories come up whenever you do the things. You need information, you need shared mental models, you need to be able to analyze the data, you need to create alignment, you need to create flow through the system, then you need a supportive environment so your feedback loops can yield into yourself. So the failures you see are usually one of those particular components. And one thing is that someone in my company, Tanner, has this amazing saying. He's like, are you learning faster than you can build, or are you building faster than you can learn? It's like super interesting if you start to think about it. Because often when I ask a CEO, they're like, well, of course, we're learning faster than we can build. Of course, like we're just not building fast enough. But if you wind back the clock, back beforehand, there was a time when you were building faster than you could learn, and often what you find is the problem is you kept doing that for so long that then you had so much complexity in your product and things started to break so much that then you are legitimately not able to build fast enough. So I think that that balance between learning velocity and building velocity and finding that right balance, you just don't see that on junior teams a lot. They're still trying to get that sense. They're either heavy in the, sometimes they're paralyzed. They need perfect data before they're going to get going. That nothing's going out the door, you know, there's no action on that. And then sometimes it's the absolute flip side of the problem. It's like, we're kicking ass. I mean, we're doing these things and we've, you know, ship every single day. And in 6 months, you're like, could you walk me through your product decisions? What has had an impact for the business? I don't know to do those things. So I would say that that's one area where the speed and the velocity makes a difference to do those things.
Great.
Experience helps, I think.
Let's take flow, because you mentioned that. I think I have a slide here.
Oh yeah, this is my favorite. This is awesome.
I saw this on the internet a little while ago, and it kind of
terrified me. Really good.
But basically, you did this, and this is about basically bad work in progress management. Do you want to explain kind of how this works?
Absolutely. This is like really so the lesson with this particular drawing is that for many of you who are in who go to work and you feel like you're in this dysfunctional environment, you're just like, it makes your head hurt, that level of thing. Often when I really ask the team and I trace back the particular issues, at some point there was just too much work in progress. They were just trying to do too much. So we can just follow the line. If you have too much work in progress, you go slower, which means it takes longer to learn, which means take it longer to deliver. It takes longer to realize benefits, which then hurts your outcomes. I'm going to fall, it'd be funny. And then, which then hurts morale of your company, so you lose key players in your company, then you hire new players rapidly, which then saps throughput. We can go other ways through it, right? Like, let's say you lose focus, which means your outcomes will go down, your morale goes down. When morale goes down, you start to be more opaque about your work. You don't share things transparently, which means that the lack of the confidence the team is doing its best or trying hard, which then creates distrust, which loses outcomes. But then, when you lose outcomes, you have pressure for short-term benefits. Like, we need a silver bullet here, right? Need silver bullets. And then what that does is it causes context switching. People keep going back and forth, right? So what it also does is, which increases WIP again. You're back in this wicked cycle. But also, when you have pressure for short-term results, you create back channels to get work done. People go directly, they kind of work around the system. Anyway, so when WIP goes up, dependencies go up. So when dependencies go up, you need to hire project managers, right? We need coordinators because we've got so much work in progress, which then means that there's more upfront planning. Now, I didn't include it here, but when you do more upfront planning, you converge on solutions sooner, which means that you typically have less quality solutions. But I didn't even include that because it would make it too big. But once you have upfront planning, you create local agendas, which then actually sap focus. I think I got all of it. reward outcomes over outputs means you reward being busy, which means that people are always busy, and you reward them from it, which also includes upfront planning. So like the reason why I share this a lot, there's actually like it's a pretty deep reason why I do it, because often what happens is that when I'm working or coaching with a team, and I mean, there's some pretty experienced coaches. Alex, my friend, yeah, he works with you now. Like he's seen this a lot. Is often you come in and you're in this area over here. And everyone's taking it extremely personally, right? Like, why don't they trust us? Why are people leaving? We don't understand what's going on. It feels real. It really feels a hard place to be in. Why are we losing key players? Why aren't people doing these things? And the reason why I share this with PMs is that you are, in many cases, directly responsible for this. You're pushing what I call Tetris playing. What's that engineer doing over there? Because I've got this really small story I think that they could work on while that other engineer is doing this particular thing, and then I'm going to get them to do that. And is it going to take 3 weeks or 4 weeks? Because if it's going to take 3 weeks, then I'm going to prioritize this 1-day thing after the 3-week thing, because then they're going to do a 5-day thing on top of that. And then once we all do that together, then right by the end of the quarter, this other thing that's dependent on all those things, we're going to finish, and it's all going to be done. That's Tetris playing, right? So that level of thinking as a PM is very ingrained. You try to get the quote-unquote most out of your team. It's sort of an anti-pattern. But I show this to PMs just for you to really get real with what this does in your environment if you try to keep everyone really, really busy. Also, a lot of engineering managers do the same thing. They'll have individual engineers, have individual backlogs. They just try to keep everyone topped up. As if, like, that they just try to do that. And so what that does is it creates this sort of systemic thing. So that's why I share the drawing a lot. Yeah. We can go back to our little chairs.
Yeah, we can go back to our seats. So is flow just less whip? What is flow to you?
I mean, there's two things. I mean, some people are familiar with flow psychology, generally. So in flow psychology, it's actually pretty easy to explain. It's that feeling of being in the zone. You're appropriately challenged. You have fewer, like, oh, fuck moments. Like, you're just, like, no major change in scope. They didn't need to do any more capacity planning. That would take 15 to 30 days. And then 3 years later, it took 150 to 300 days. That's the type of flow that I'm talking about. And when it comes to learning as a team, often what I ask a product team is, what did you learn this week? Because you need to create a flow of learning as well. And if they're like, well, I don't know. I mean, we just kind of integrated this stuff, and 3 weeks from now, we'll know something. It's actually very different when you see these like really high-performing teams. They're like, well, this week we found out this, we found out that. We've kind of switched corner there. So there's flow of learning as well to do those things.
And what do you do? What do you do when some of the pieces of this system are kind of outside the control of the team? The pressure for short-term results comes from, I don't know, some executive that, the team is sort of not in a very, a position to influence that, or maybe there's an externally imposed deadline that's just kind of causing the entire company to run really fast. I mean, how do you deal with constraints that are harder to influence if you're, say, like a junior PM in one of these teams?
Oh, that's so hard. That's really the question, isn't it? I think you and I were talking about this before, and I would kind of use that same analogy. And I call it kind of the belief ladder. So imagine a ladder. It's tilted up against a wall. And you and someone else are going to be climbing this ladder together. Now, at the ground, everyone can believe in things. If I say, oh, do you want to be data-driven? They're like, yep, I want to be data-driven. Do you want to... should you engage your employees? Yeah, great, awesome. Should we think about outcomes? Yeah, that's great, really, really good. But as you start to go up the ladder and things start to get scarier, right, you hit this point where you don't have a shared vocabulary. Like, what do you mean we can't plan the roadmap 12 months in advance? Or like, I said I wanted people to be engaged, but I didn't want to give them like access to the data or the tools. We do a lot of this at Amplitude. So I would say that every product manager here is a change agent. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think that you're here, so you're ahead of the curve. And I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but just by being here, you are thinking more about product than 90% of product people, right? So there's always going to be an asymmetry between everyone here and common practice. That's sort of my sort of very simplified model to do it. So almost by nature, you are a change agent. in these particular environments. So what you need to understand is the senior leader may have never experienced firsthand what slightly better looks like or better looks like to do these things. So back to this whole idea of tweaking what you do, you are not going to change all their perspectives in one day, but can you do one thing this week to do that? Or, Hugh, you're my manager, and I'm like, Hugh, I know, there's this one effort, that one that we're talking about? I really want to do a real design sprint with that where we embed the engineers and we go out into the city of Sao Paulo and we interview people together and we do like rapid prototyping and we develop those things. I know it's a stretch. I'm doing these other 7 things for you that are just the things that we want to do. Can we run this one experiment? And one thing I would say is if you do that in a nice way, in a productive way, and you have a boss who says no repeatedly, then find another boss. It's just, I know not everyone has the ability.
In this scenario, I was your boss, but yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What?
In this scenario, I was your boss.
Oh, your boss. Did you say yes?
Yeah.
No. No,
Sure.
sure. So whoever at Nubank wants to go out and run that small experiment, like now has permission to do that particular experiment. But anyway, so I guess my point, the TLDR, every product manager is a change agent. By being here, you're probably, individuals move faster than companies. So you have already absorbed a lot of modern methods that it takes companies a really long time to be able to do. So you're always going to be slightly ahead of the curve, and you almost need to live with that. It took me a lot of career pain and heartache to learn that. You are a change agent. You have to be effective at it.
Cool. So let's come back to decision velocity. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but one thing that sometimes I see PMs struggle with a bit is how do you know when you have enough? Feel free to keep asking questions. I'll get to your questions in a second. Sorry. How do you know when you have enough information to move forward? How can you get okay with a certain amount of uncertainty and just it might even be the wrong decision, but at least we're taking a decision. How have you seen kind of teams? Because at one extreme, I don't think we want people. We have customers. We don't want to be taking reckless risks. But on the other extreme, we also don't want to be standing still. And I think that's a problem that teams often have. Is how do you get more comfortable with uncertainty?
So I think, I've drawn another diagram for this that has all the loops, but I didn't bring it with me. But the ability, so one thing, for example, someone asked the other day, what is the most abused word in product management? They said MVP, right? And so I asked, why is it an MVP? And they said, well, it's just the product manager's excuse to ship shit and then just move on to the next thing. That's why. And so, I couldn't totally disagree with them. Actually, like in common use, that's the particular thing. So the ability to handle uncertainty and the ability to build the trust to make those types of decisions also has the willingness to remove stuff from the product, to take decisions that didn't work out the way you thought they would work out and have the guts really to take them out. So without that, it's very, very difficult to have any trust from the members of your team that you're going to approach uncertain. Because then everyone is smart. Designers are going to look at you and they're going to say, no, there's not going to be the next sprint after that. I can tell. It's all going in the product right now. And engineers are going to do the same thing. They're going to say, I've played this game before. This is the MVP game. We're going to be ready for 1 billion transactions a day because you're not going to let us be ready for it after that. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is to get confidence with dealing with uncertainty, you also need to create that flow around removing things. And that's what builds the trust to take risks. One thing you notice is that uncertainty is usually a sign that something is really, really potentially valuable. If things are 100% certain, many of your businesses wouldn't exist, right? Like, uncertainty means information that is there that hasn't been clarified, and if you can capture that information and learn faster about that uncertainty, that means that you've done it. So once you see uncertainty as an opportunity, and once you build the muscle to be able to actually build the trust on your team that you're not going to just keep going down that path, that you're going to actually be able to run true experiments, that you're going to be able to pivot if you need to do that. And then once as a team, if it takes 6 months for you to ship something, you're only going to want to be 100% sure about everything you ship. And by trying to be 100% sure about everything you ship, you'll almost de facto be mediocre about everything you ship. So that's the loop you want to break out of doing those things. Build the trust, pull stuff out, build the loops about what you're doing, and then it sort of falls in. It's kind of multifactored, right? It's not just like you need to be okay with uncertainty. People are smart, and they'll call you out on it if you haven't done it.
Great. Okay, I'm going to ask 2 more.
I can make the questions. I can make my answers shorter, too, if you want.
No, it's fine. I think everybody's okay.
Yeah.
And then I'll take a few from the audience. So changing gears a little bit, I think we probably have a bunch of people in the audience who are just getting involved in product, maybe a couple years. What's your advice to people who are becoming PMs now or just starting out as PMs?
It's going to sound goofy, but keep a diary.
A diary.
A diary. So for any junior PM, the first thing this is sort of like my advice that I give, because I ask them to keep like a decision diary or a kind of play-by-play. And I also ask them to keep a mental model for uncertainty and the beliefs that exist currently in their product. So even from the beginning, I'll say to the junior PM, I'll say like, if your boss isn't asking for this, I want you to just do this yourself. Have a way for you to work on that reflection around your decisions, new emerging risks that you've experienced in your particular environment. What does your 12-month mission-driven roadmap look like? So basically, the advice that I give them right away is if no one's going to do it for you, just start this level of reflection. The second thing that I always recommend, too, is to kind of block out 30 minutes a day for learning and reflection. Because often when a junior PM everything's crazy. They're running around. They're very, very worried. And they don't leave time, maybe at the end of the week or daily, to kind of reflect on those things. The third thing is I ask them to get a mentor, but a mentor who's not directly involved with their particular group, because it could get kind of messy if that's their particular mentor. And sometimes even an engineering mentor or someone like that would be really good to be able to kind of like help frame their environment. So I think that those 3 things together, these are more tactics, and I'll get into the more sort of bigger picture thing, but keeping a decision diary and like something to reflect on regularly, finding a mentor in the particular organization, and then carving out this reflection time that you're doing that time. And one thing about this is that a lot of this is about the future of your career, because I've observed a lot of junior PMs just spin their wheels for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and not really get like a promotion and not really do that. And when I really dig into why, it's because they've been so reactive for those 4 years that they've never really stepped back, thought about outcomes, thought about like these sort of deeper strategic things. They've just been reactive into that point. So,
but I guess just to dig in on that, when you say be less reactive, what should they be doing?
What should they be doing instead? Well, part of one of these things is so part of the whole thing about the decision diary and the thing is getting ahead of the questions. So this is a lot of junior PMs, it's like they're so like deer in the headlights when the question comes in. So an example would be is like when I'm selling to a junior PM is like, look, every day have the answer ready for when your manager says, so what's on your mind? Just have it. Like, well, we're working on this, which is really related to this bet that we can grow this number of things by that. And if we're successful doing that in the next 3 to 6 months, we should start to see like a leveling off of that NPS score. And then hopefully by the end of the year, the NPS score will increase instead of going down. And really my core risk at the moment is, can we continue to make our product infinitely customizable and then keep our small to medium-sized business customers, which I'm afraid of losing. So that's like a 60-second, I don't know, I just made it up, right? So that's like a 30-second, 60-second answer that you could have ready at all the time. That's what I mean by building the muscle. That's what and no one's going to, what typically happens is that your boss comes and says, so what's on your mind? And you're like, I'm really busy and I've got all these meetings and I'm doing these particular things. They don't say, could you actually just give me, could you crystallize it? They're just like, oh, cool, thanks, later, So it's kind of muscle building. It takes a lot of practice.
All right, last one for you, from me, I mean. So, we're here in Brazil. There's not as many tech companies in Brazil as there are in Silicon Valley, and in the product community is a bit more of a sort of a nascent community here.
You guys are doing, this is big. I mean, I know there's 22 million people here, so you think per capita.
22 million.
There's a lot of people in Sao Paulo. I mean,
Oh,
not
in Sao
all.
Paulo, in Sao
Yeah,
Paulo.
not all product managers, but I'm just saying, as a percentage of the population, this is actually a highly effective product meetup for a Monday night, like world class. I'm not sure you guys know that, but it's pretty
thanks
amazing.
for saying that. But I guess, yeah. So no, this is actually kind of a trick question. So one advantage of us building a nascent product community is we're kind of unburdened with bad habits and sort of things that Silicon Valley might have accumulated over the years. So my question is, what are things that you see in the Valley that you don't like, and that maybe we should try to avoid developing as sort of bad habits or bad tendencies here in Brazil as kind of product becomes much more of a sort of a real career that people understand, et cetera?
So I think one mistake about Silicon Valley is that it is the best at all these particular practices. And you have to view Silicon Valley in context, that there is an incredible growth mandate for companies. I'll tell a story. I know an engineer. I said, you don't really need to be working, do you? He's like, no, I've worked at 15 companies over the last 15 years. He's like, I just stay at one for exactly 12 months, and they're all a shit show, so I just go to the next one, and I just get enough stock, so I have stock in 15 companies. And I was like, well, people keep hiring you after that to do these things? He's like, yeah, they just kind of bring me in to do these things. Like, it is like there's many negative effects to being in those particular environments. And so I'd say that one thing that you see, and there's some really, really, really good thinkers. I think like Andrew Chen's a very interesting thinker when it comes to growth and stuff like that. But even he will say the amount of kind of local optimization around data, sort of like algorithmic optimization around a pretty shitty idea that's not very user-centric and not really necessarily like involving designers or other people. There's actually a lot of that. And so I think that that's one thing that, that's one anti-pattern. So we do these calls for Amplitude, so it's really funny. If you go, a lot of our Bay Area companies, I'll say, when's the last time you spoke with a customer? They're like, oh, we're really, really busy. We don't really have time to talk to a customer. And then you talk to someone outside of the Bay Area, and they're like, well, we only talk to the customers. We don't really know how to use quantitative data, right? But we have customers. We've actually evolved a UX practice, or we've done those particular things. So somewhere in the middle is where all of us exist, hopefully to be able to do those things. I would say also like there's a relative sort of short-termism in the Bay Area that leads to a lot of organizational anti-patterns. And the way that I would explain that is I live in Santa Barbara, and there's actually really vibrant tech companies in Santa Barbara in the United States. The average tenure at those companies might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Versus the Bay Area where it's like 16 months, 18 months, or doing those things. So depending on your personal value system, for mine in particular, I would prefer that we create companies that people actually want to continue working in. But that's just me.
No, I agree with that. Okay, so I'm going to start with some of the questions from the audience. If you have a question, click on this link above me. Oh, there's like nicknames. This is kind of cute. So the first one is from Kemal Zaidan. So what about when the PM doesn't have a team and his choices are prioritized by a manager in the development team? How to deal with that? So kind of related to the discussion before about not always having to staff a PM in different teams.
That builds the same reaction that I had the first time to do those things. So basically, highly like disempowered, and then hit from all sides about what they need to be able to do. Here's the hack. This is a far more positive way to look at it. Is that at the end of the day, your decisions will have some kind of outcome. And at the simplest level, if you're a PM in that environment, you can encapsulate the decision and present back to the company about the outcomes related to that decision. So, I wrote this post called about feature factories, like how do you know you're working in a feature factory? And I got a lot of feedback from that, but I started to think like, well, it's pretty judgmental of me. Like sometimes building exactly this might be the thing to do. Like sometimes that is the thing to do. The real issue with a feature factory is that you're not reflecting on your decisions. You're not understanding if they have an impact. So one thing I would say as a PM in that type of environment, example, so like Hugh is like, John, build this. Like, oh, well, Hugh, that's a really interesting bet. Like if your bet works out the way you think it will, what are we going to observe? Then Hugh's going to say, I just told him to build this feature, and he's talking to me about a bet, but it seems kind of interesting. I'm a bettor. I'm a gambler guy. I think, I'll humor you. I think that this will go up. Great. Awesome. I know you're expecting me to build exactly this, but I'm just understanding your bet. You think that's going to go up, and you think it's going to take a couple months. I'm going to go back. What do you think the status quo behavior is? And then you'll say, well, I don't know. I mean, people don't use it. That's why we need to build exactly what I want them to do. The hack is to go back in 2 or 3 months and say, well, Hugh told me to build exactly this. And before he told me to do this, this was what the status quo behavior was. After we did it, here's the resulting behavior. This is what we learned while we did it. And how do we want to make better decisions next time? So even in a feature factory, usually you don't need to ask anyone's permission to do that and to reflect on it. So you can still be a good PM in that environment to just help shine the mirror back on the organization about whether what you did had the impact that you wanted it to have.
Great. So from unicorn aspirant, how is the decision process for a PM to decide prioritizing between riskier product innovation rather than incremental evolution?
I haven't heard that question before, Hugh. That's really funny. That's not you? You didn't just write that again just for fun?
I know, very, very similar.
Okay, yeah, something very, very similar to those things. I mean, the answer is that you make a portfolio of bets. Like most tech companies are making a range of bets. And you'll hear me talking about bets. The reason why I like talking about bets is because it's a very interesting word, right? You can have big bets, you can have small bets, you can have risky bets, you can have safe bets. You can have bets that you can play the game after the game has started. You have some bets that you're only able to bet before the game has started. You have some games that you spend most of your money in the beginning, but then you can just tweak your bet slightly as you go along. It's an interesting word because that's reflective of product. I think a lot of people would love product to be a science, and I see it more as a game. If it was a science, we use applied science, I guess, in computer science and other things like that, but so much of product is timing and luck and being in those places. So that's why I like to use this thing of a bet. So the answer to that question is, what does your profile of bets look like? Are you only making extremely safe bets that everyone thinks are going to work out? That might be right in some environments, but that might not be right in your particular environment. And typically, if it's a bet that's less certain, maybe there's a higher upside. Can you use methods to be able to reduce the risk over time? So anyway, we could go on and on about bets, but the answer to that is framing a portfolio of things. And once you start talking about it like that, as a PM, you're able to get more feedback from your team, and they're understanding your calculus, as opposed to the worst thing as a PM is to go on with like, well, it's just the top of the list. You're working with like skilled problem solvers. That will never go over. Like, they'll hate you if you say that, right? But if you go in, if you say, like, we've got a portfolio of bets and our certainty here is here, and we have data to really demonstrate this, and this is a moonshot bet. It's so emergent, we don't even think we can get really valuable data from the market at the moment, but we're willing to make this bet and pull it off the shelves if something doesn't work out, and that's what we're willing to do. That takes a lot of maturity as a PM to do, but that's really the answer.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning that there's external constraints as well, right? Sometimes you can't take these huge innovation bets early on when you might be needing to prove your business model to investors and things like that. So I think the shape of your portfolio depends a lot on sort of the constraints that you're operating under as well, which is definitely something that we've lived through as well over the years. Okay. Desperate PO. I love these nicknames.
Oh my God. I feel like I want some music, like some sad music.
Even the tone of the question sounds desperate. Have you ever seen scenarios where the entire product needed to halt so they could get their shit together? How was it?
Yes. Like that's that
It's
whip.
unclear if they is the product or the team.
So that's like that whip diagram. If you run the system hot like that for too long, it's going to collapse eventually. This is what I've learned. Does anyone heard the term tech debt month? Oh, right. That's good. Oh, tech debt week? Tech debt quarter? Tech debt quarter. So here's what I've worked in an environment where there's a tech debt month. And you know what happened? All the engineers were exactly like product managers. Like, oh my God, we've got 1 month to do whatever we want. This is amazing. Like, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this. It's free season now. The PMs have left the building. We can do whatever the F we want. This is amazing. Like, there's 150 things on the backlog, and we're going to have meetings for 3 weeks out of the tech debt month to really debate what we're going to work on. And then at the last little part, they get 3 things done, you know, the particular thing. So I don't know what that reminded you of, but yeah, yes, occasionally everything gets completely messed up. The answer is not a tech debt month. The answer is to like figure out how to progressively get a healthier and healthier system. Like I said in the beginning, there's always problems. If there's no problems, probably something is wrong. It's kind of a way to look at it. But at least with the technology stuff, you will hit that point. Don't do a tech debt month. I'd say that one thing that PMs can do during that time is partner with an engineer if they don't have a product manager and help them build a business case. So here's an example for a tech debt business case. It's super, super easy. This is real data. So company was shipping and over a course of the year started to experience 50% more drag. So if you imagine we're walking and the wind is blowing against us, they walked half the speed. There's wind blowing at them, right? So that means that it didn't matter how valuable any feature was. There was no way that it would compete with the fact that imagine you're playing a sport and you have to carry a huge weight behind you and you're not able to do anything. So once you start to think of it this way, as a PM, you can work with engineers to build a business case around the debt, as opposed to being. I mean, I'm really into the the craftsmanship thing. I really relate to people wanting to do a good job, but too few engineers go to the mat and build a really good business case. And you can build that business case if you want to do that. So, if you're a PM in that environment and you're doing it and you don't have anything to do except all your side projects that you'll drop on the team once they're done with their tech debt month. Partner with one of those engineers and like help them try to build a sustainable business case for what they're doing. That would be a solution.
Great. Anonymous.
Hopefully not the anonymous.
No, there's several anonymi here. How do you manage to integrate growth experiments inside your sprints?
I wish I learned more about the background of that question. I think it's
maybe a more general one would just be how
Yeah.
do you within teams sort of increase the rate of experimentation or experimentation around growth in general?
So one I think major misunderstanding is that sprints are often so abused for what they are meant to be, right? Like a sprint is supposed to be a healthy forcing function that helps the team to integrate their learning, potentially integrate code, to get back on the same page and reflect and adapt on what they're doing. And it's a positive forcing function, so a forcing function that helps you kind of break out of automatic thought. That's really the definition of a forcing function. It's supposed to be a positive thing. So one thing about when people are trying to say, like, how do we fit X into a sprint? The first question I ask is, are you bringing in an overly myopic, very like pedantic, strict definition to what a sprint is? And is that the thing that's making it very difficult for you to figure out how your growth experiments fit? So if I went to a team, sorry, that was a burp. So one thing when a team says, I'm having trouble fitting X into the sprint, the first thing I say is, let's shorten the sprint. And they say, well, what do you mean? We were having trouble fitting that into the sprint. And the thing's like, well, maybe the sprint's too long. Why don't we just kind of, could we do one-day sprints? Could we do a growth experiment in one day? They said, well, no, that's impossible. Why is it impossible? Because people will laugh at us. I'm like, well, no, why don't we just try doing that in one day? So what I'm trying to get at is all these questions of how do we do X in a sprint, it's really kind of up to the team to use this forcing function in an effective way instead of it beating them, which is often what sprints are kind of like beat the team on to be able to do the thing. So the standard thing is just do less and try something way smaller. Can we just do one tiny experiment this particular sprint? And if we're successful at that, then we can ramp up what we're doing over time. So I don't know why I got into the sprint thing, but the same thing with design. I'm really into this, like, how do you fit design into agile? Why don't they ask, how do you fit agile into design? No, they don't. It's always, how do you fit X into agile, or how do you fit X into sprints, or how do you do those? It really shows like an overly, I don't know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me when we do that.
No, that's helpful. I mean, one thing that that we've talked about in teams here is in order to just kind of jumpstart that muscle, actually having a number of experiments as a metric, which it feels like you're not solving for the right thing. It feels like what you really want is learnings, right. But at least to kind of get people into that rhythm, maybe something like a couple small experiments per month, etc., or per quarter is useful. Yep. Okay, a question from Fernando. What do you think the PM of the future looks like? How technical do we need to be when it comes to AI?
Wow, that's awesome. So first of all, there's obviously food and drink over there. What are you guys good for, like 5 or 10 more minutes, or you guys want the food now?
I think we'll do 5 more minutes, so maybe 2 more questions, and then everybody can grab lots of food.
Awesome. The future of PM. The what?
After that, they said they should ask me some.
Why don't I just ask you some, because we haven't had. No, why don't you answer this one, because you probably will rock this one.
Okay.
I should have been doing that the whole time. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. No, I figured people are here to see you. I think it's a good question. I don't know if I have a sort of a great answer to the AI machine learning piece, other than the fact that I think PMs need to be very relevant, and machine learning and data science is just going to become, increasingly more important in product development teams in the future. I do think, though, and something hopefully this discussion was focusing on a little bit more, I do think the PMs of the future are going to deal a lot more in platforms. I really do see our roles, especially in organizations like Nubank, where it's sort of a matrix. I see our roles are really much more in figuring out ways to just make products that are extremely nimble, and that are very, very customizable, that leverage kind of all sorts of data coming from our customers, and those products tend to feel very platformy to me. And so I think more and more PMs are going to need to be thinking kind of along those dimensions. Does that mean that necessarily we need to be more technical? Probably. But I don't think that necessarily means that the profile of PMs has to change a ton. I don't think it means that PMs all need to be programmers. However, I do think being able to get more into the details as far as things like machine learning are concerned, I think will be important.
I think, just to add to that, I think that you have to see the PM evolution in evolution with other things. It's that what I'm increasingly seeing is teams of really passionate engineers and passionate designers working closely together. It's my general belief that that unit can be given a problem. And so I like to say that you're doing your job as a PM if you can present an opportunity that people can have 3 different distinct ways to achieve that opportunity. And so one major shift is with that particular thing. So as these other groups, as team units become more autonomous and they become more effective at working together, the PM role shifts more to context builder and there's less herding. There's this case of herding cats or trying to do these sort of weird things that PMs do. As you see these other disciplines really get empowered, it actually shifts the PM from having to micromanage those particular things and shifts them into doing things which frankly I think are kind of more interesting and what they might be better at. So put yourself out of a job in terms of being a PM.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think the job kind of reinvents itself, and it's only going to increase more so. So I think that puts a premium on things like emotional intelligence, mental stability, probably as well, and less of a premium on
sleep.
And less of a premium on where you went to college or what you majored in. And so fast learning, problem solving, I think gets all the more important.
Cool. We good?
All right, let's give a hand to John, everybody.
And to Hugh. Oh, let me, this is pretty good. We did this partnership. Hold on one second.
I think we have little gifts.
All right. I only can carry my baby now. I can't carry anything else.
So John, do you want to explain what these books are?
Yeah, so we have a person on staff. Her name is Archana, and she's really fallen in love with writing these books. And so she wrote Mastering Retention and Mastering Engagement. And so she's like really, really good at this, and she's put a lot of heart and soul into it. But what we did is we partnered with Nubank, and we printed these up together. So we have 100 of each, 100 of one book and 100 of the other. The one thing is that we didn't want to. You don't need 7 of these if you're one small team. We got to there's trees involved and things like that, and rainforests involved and stuff. So if you go to that link right there, and you just provide your information and then just come and meet us right here, then we can give you a printed book, but you can also get the digital copy to share with your team and do things. So try to spread the printed books among everyone. I think that's like a good thing. But we thank Nubank for setting it up and going. Actually, they actually theoretically own it right now because we haven't figured out how to pay Nubank back. Nubank is a finance company, but we're actually having trouble paying you for the retention playbooks. So. Anyway,
Cool.
that's good.
And there's more food and drink at the back, so feel free to grab stuff. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Do you want to rotate back? We don't need to keep it on just